Daniela grabbed the toddler's wrist harder than the moment called for. "No," she said sharply, pulling the 2-year-old's hand away from the ornament box on the coffee table. "We don't touch things that aren't ours." It wasn't the words. It was the grip, the sudden yank that made the little boy's face crumple before he even understood why. Renata was across the room in 3 steps, crouching down, gathering her son into her arms, glancing up at her sister with an expression that asked, silently, "Was that really necessary?" "Don't start drama," Carmen said from the kitchen doorway, not even fully turning around. "It's Christmas." Nobody else in the room said anything. Aunts studied their wine glasses. Cousins suddenly found their phones interesting. It was a room full of people who had gotten very good over many years at looking somewhere else when Daniela's temper flared, and Carmen smoothed it over before anyone had to sit with it. Renata had grown up inside that pattern long enough to know how it worked. You didn't push back. You absorbed it, soothed your child, and moved on before the room got uncomfortable. She'd done it 100 times. She was doing it again now, bouncing her son gently, whispering that he was okay, that Auntie didn't mean it. When she felt her husband's hand rest briefly on her shoulder as he stood, Mateo Reyes was still in uniform, having come straight from a shift that ran long. He wasn't a man who raised his voice or filled a room with his presence unnecessarily. In 4 years of marriage, Renata had watched him handle far more volatile situations than a family Christmas party, with a stillness that never needed to perform itself. He'd always let her take the lead with her own family, staying quiet even when she could tell it cost him something to do it. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, one that had clearly been there since before dinner. "You open this one last," he said to the room, calm, almost gentle, gesturing to the pile of gifts still waiting on the side table for their annual exchange. Not a demand, just a request, the kind that made people listen, because it was so unlike him to ask for anything. The gift exchange continued as it always did. Small presents, funny stories, the usual warmth of a family that, on the surface, loved each other easily. But something in the room had shifted, a low hum of unease nobody could quite name yet. When the last gift had been opened, Mateo set the envelope in the center of the table. Inside was a letter. He'd been writing it for weeks, he explained quietly. Not as a confession, but as a simple fact. Not out of anger. Out of the accumulation of small moments he'd watched from the edges of family gatherings for years, moments Renata had always minimized to keep the peace. Moments he'd started writing down because patterns are easier to see on paper than they are to feel in a single instant. The letter didn't accuse anyone of anything dramatic. It simply listed plainly 6 specific incidents over 3 years. A niece's arm gripped too hard at a birthday party, a nephew scolded until he cried at a barbecue, tonight's moment with their son, each one small enough to excuse on its own, but undeniable when placed next to each other in a single factual account. Daniela's hands were shaking by the second paragraph. It wasn't public shaming that did it. It was recognition. Reading her own pattern laid out plainly, without exaggeration or cruelty, in a way she'd never had to face because the family had always been so quick to move past each individual moment before it could add up to anything. Carmen, for the first time in longer than she could remember, didn't rush to fill the silence. She sat with it, watching her older daughter's hands tremble around a piece of paper. She understood something she'd spent years avoiding, that "don't start drama" had never actually protected anyone. It had simply protected the moment from being uncomfortable, at the cost of the children who kept absorbing it. "Has this really been happening this much?" Daniela finally asked, looking at Renata, her voice smaller than anyone at the table had heard it in years. "Yes," Renata said simply. "Not cruel, just honest." Maybe for the first time in this family's long history of choosing peace over truth, there was no dramatic apology, no tearful redemption arc. Daniela sat with the letter a long time, asking quiet questions, some of which Renata answered, and some of which just hung in the air, unresolved the way real conversations often are. Carmen reached over at one point and took her daughter's hand, not to excuse anything, but simply to stay present in a conversation she would have once redirected. Mateo didn't say much else that night. He sat back down beside his wife, his hand finding hers under the table, having done the one thing this family had never quite managed to do for itself. Name the pattern clearly enough that it couldn't be quietly waved away again. Sometimes protecting the people you love isn't about keeping the room comfortable. It's about being willing to let it be uncomfortable long enough for the truth to actually land.